Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well. Guess what? It's the midweek hump. The midweek hump. I didn't know what day it was last week, did I? So, I actually know that today is Wednesday. Today's a midweek hump, and you are looking absolutely amazing. Probably because it's the midweek hump, and everyone loves a midweek hump. So we get on with it, though, because this morning we are going to be talking specifically about the PCA and breaking that PCA down into 4 pieces that we're going to speak on. And then at the end, we're just going to do some key pointers that are things that I think everybody, whatever side of the fence you're on, should really start to take into consideration. And why am I talking about the PCA now? Because we have an issue. This case has a massive, massive issue. And whether you are a pro-burger or a crucified Bryan Kohberger, now I've seen everything I need to see, then this should concern you either way. Because when you look at the way that this situation is being handled, it raises some significant alarm bells. And what I mean by that is we are nearly 2 years down the road, right? Nearly 2 years in. And it would appear that the defence team doesn't have the evidence to back up the PCA. And bearing in mind that the PCA was the root cause, if you like, of the arrest that would lead to the charge, that would lead to Bryan Kohberger being incarcerated for the last 18 months, you would certainly expect by now that the defence team would have all of the evidence to at least support the PCA. There may be stuff to come later. And what frustrates me is there's so many people in the comments that say, oh, there's so much more. There's so much more. There's 51 terabytes of evidence against Bryan Kohberger. It's going to come out. Look, I don't care about what we have access to in terms of evidence, and I fully appreciate that there is a need to withhold some of that information from the public domain, 100%. But when you are seeing that the defence are not getting the information, that's different. There is a legal obligation for the prosecution to hand over all of the evidence that is going to be used against the accused during the trial, before the trial. That's not a want or a desire or a if you're lucky you might. That's a legal obligation. Trial by ambush is not legal. It's not something that is just legal. It ain't legal. But let's go down this PCA and just to bring things into perspective, what the issue is here. So the first part, and I've got some notes here because I'm getting old and I haven't got the memory that I used to once have. The eyewitness account is the first part of the PCA, which gives a story of someone who saw something. And, a lot of people are convicted on eyewitness accounts. But what is the issue with the Idaho 4 and the eyewitness account? Now, sometimes we speak about this perhaps in the wrong context, and that is that James Fry early on had stated that the surviving roommates were not witnesses. Well, what he basically said really is he wasn't confirming that they were witnesses. He didn't list them or state that they were witnesses, and that could have been done for multiple reasons. The main one potentially to protect them. So he wasn't going to publicly say, oh yes, we've got some people here who were in the house at the time and saw everything. We can't expect him to have done that, and perhaps I myself have to hold my hands up that when speaking about this specific element of the case, I've perhaps been too harsh on James Fry there. What did I expect? Would I have expected him to throw them under the bus, so to speak? But in reality, that there is an issue with that. And that is that her statement, the statement that was released, and again, which is shown in the PCA, isn't really indicative of the perpetrator being Bryan Kohberger. It's just a generic statement in terms of if someone was going to break into someone's house, what would you expect them to do? Anybody to do? Wear dark clothing, cover their face. They wouldn't be able to cover their eyes, or they'd be walking around the house like this, trying to feel and steal stuff. So that's not going to happen. So their eyes are going to be visible. Again, wearing dark clothing. They're not going to go out with, wearing a harsh reality hoodie. I'm not even wearing one. But do you know what I mean? So blank, plain clothing to keep them black. So it's a very generic description. And when you pair that with elements of frozen shock phase and these stories in the background, this eyewitness account is something that would easily be pulled apart by the defense team. And also, you have to understand that it would appear, from what we've seen, we don't know, this isn't definitive proof, but it's certainly a nod towards it, that perhaps the eyewitness account, which were taken as Dylan Mortensen, there could be issues with that coming from the other person who was in the house, Bethany Funk. Now, we was told very early on by a private investigator for the defence that Bethany Funk had potentially, well, it wasn't even about potentially, it was that they believed she had exculpatory evidence and gave a nod to her experiences on the night that were, her own experience. They were unique to herself. And all it takes is for Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk's stories to clash in some way. Perhaps something is seen by Dylan Mortensen that Bethany Funk saw at a different time, or she could corroborate a different time, or she has a different version of that event, or she saw someone else in the house perhaps wearing different clothes, or no clothes. Who knows? But do you know what the eyewitness account is not a solid piece of evidence, not by a long shot. The next one is the video evidence, and the video evidence is seemingly around the white Hyundai Elantra. And obviously we've got Cell, and we'll come to that later on. But the video evidence, so they have, and we have seen, been privy to video evidence in the likes of the Linda Lane footage. We believe there's another light bulb camera close by as well, and there is also audio from one of those cameras, and there are still images as well. The issue that I have with this, it would seem that only a proportion of that evidence has been shown to Ann Taylor, and it would appear that the bits that she has seen is not, again, indicative of Bryan Kohberger being at 1122 King Road committing this crime. So what they're basically saying is, it's like following a car down a track. Like when the likes of Grey Hughes does like an animation where it shows the car. Well, imagine that same animation, but the car disappears and then it reappears. It disappears for a time and it reappears. It's not just one long, winding drive that you can follow and you can see, and you are sure that, yes, we can see this car travelling from point A to point B and then back from point B to point A again. It's okay that you can say that you believe it travelled that route, but you only saw it at specific points that, again, can't be fully corroborated. But, again, this is the issue with the video footage. What Ann Taylor is consistently requesting is the full information that would support the route and everything that they have placed inside the PCA, rather than saying, well, it pinged on this tower and it pinged on this tower, and because it pinged on these towers, we can say that we're pretty sure that this car went from A to B and it makes sense that they went on this route. Do you know what I mean? That's not proof. That is just taking some data and extrapolating from it to make your story fit, which is what the prosecution have to do. They have to do. Law enforcement have to show that it's feasible, it's plausible. But what they don't go into detail and tell you in this, obviously not, is they don't tell you the downsides. You only see one side of the story. And that is that, for instance, cell towers have a range of approximately 27 square miles. So a car can be anywhere within a 27 square mile radius and it hits on that tower. What they also don't speak to you about is how those towers operate. And, we'll get back to that. The next one is cell data itself, that kind of rolls off from the video footage, doesn't it? So the notes that I put here is the PCA literally uses a lack of information that Bryan Kohberger did this crime. And it's important to understand that. The lack of information being that Bryan Kohberger's phone was not communicating with cell towers during a certain time. So it's almost like what they're saying is, because Bryan Kohberger's phone was not transmitting, that is indicative of him concealing his whereabouts. But again, that is just taking a leap because of how cell towers work. Phones are not consistently pinging off of cell towers. It doesn't operate in that manner. Doesn't operate in the fact that a phone is always connected to a cell tower. The phone has to be being operated, whether that be making a call, receiving a call, doing something on that phone, or the phone goes through a process that is automatically set up on there, whether it's like you have send and receive set up on your emails, for instance. Some people don't have it where it does it automatically and they physically have to go into the app, whereas some people have it where it does it automatically. When it receives an email, it automatically uploads. So all of these processes on that phone in the background that requires a cell service is why a phone would ping. So the phone has to be doing something that requires cell service in order for that tower to ping. So it could simply be that Bryan Kohberger's phone was out of signal, full stop. It could have just been at, say, Wawawi Park and out of service, so that it wasn't going to transmit to a tower. Now, Bryan Kohberger was a night owl. We know he was a night owl. And we know that we've seen footage of where he would use running programs and show that he would run at night. We had a friend who came forward and said that Bryan Kohberger would run at night with him so he didn't have to run alone at night. The friend, that is. So Bryan is running with somebody so that person doesn't have to run alone at night. But, the cell situation, I think I've covered everything. But, we are having to ignore a lot here. We're having to ignore the fact that we've got a specialist who can come in and potentially pull metadata from the phone, because the metadata differences from cell data. The metadata, if Bryan Kohberger has been at Wawawi Park, for instance, previously and taken pictures and been doing this and can show that he was using a running or a hiking app of some description or some sort of tracking location thing on his phone, and it shows he frequents, that is showing a pattern. But anyway, I'm covering that later just to help the fucking idiots that are out there who are still attacking the alibi and don't get that because they've had a knock on the head, obviously. But the next bit here is the DNA evidence, okay? And the DNA evidence is the big one. The knife sheath. That's the other part of the PCA. They have this knife sheath. My biggest question with how this was handled, we know that there was people around this case who were interviewed, questioned, and they likely had their DNA taken. I can imagine the likes of Jack DeCure, Jack Showalter, if he was ever questioned, who knows. But the people around this, they would have had their DNA taken. We know that even Jeremy, the neighbour, had gone into law enforcement and offered up his DNA. It would appear that Bryan Kohberger had also been himself and spoken to law enforcement prior to even his arrest. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the impression that I got from hearings and statements that Ann Taylor made. That he had spoken with FBI, he had spoken and had interviews with law enforcement. And I just wonder why DNA wasn't taken from Bryan Kohberger in a normal channel. If you feel that someone is a potential suspect, why all of this real convoluted way of trying to get DNA? Law enforcement are law enforcement. If there is a crime of this nature, Bryan Kohberger wasn't hiding where he was. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. He had in fact kept a doctor's appointment. He'd had his hair cut. He was getting ready to go on this road trip back home with his dad, which was pre-planned. So nothing had changed in his schedule. He was doing every single thing that he was seemingly going to do. You know, nothing had changed. So why, if law enforcement thought, do you know what, we've got this car that we believe is a white Hyundai Elantra, we've got a guy who's seemingly coming into this area. If they could prove that Bryan Kohberger, or thought that Bryan Kohberger was frequenting Moscow, Idaho, and he was driving a white Hyundai Elantra, why not just take his DNA? Why not approach him and ask for his DNA? Did they ask for his DNA? I don't understand the convoluted way in which his DNA was got hold of by going from Moscow, Idaho, all the way cross country to Pennsylvania. It's going into his parents' trash and getting a sample that was not from Bryan at all. It ended up being his father, and then building this tree. I just don't get it. Genuinely, I don't understand it. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Not when you've got somebody who has been to you, been to, heading towards law enforcement anyway, and trying to do work. Not that specific station, but he was there. The guy was there. He was someone who you was clearly following around. Why not just approach the guy and ask for his DNA? Or if you're following him around, why not take DNA from his car door handle, his apartment door handle? Why take it from the trash in Pennsylvania? And I know what some people are going to say. They're going to say they were looking for some sort of single source. But you couldn't guarantee that from going through the trash unless they lifted the entire bin and took every single thing. How does that even work? How do they know whose article they're taking from the bin? Whose thing it is? How do they? I just don't get it. It's so convoluted. Look, I'm not a scientist, and there is going to be people who argue the point and say that there's a valid reason for why they did it this way, and I just don't get it. If you think someone's a suspect, then pull the fuckers in and ask for the DNA. That's as simple as that. There was a period of time they completely lost where Bryan had gone. He was completely off the fucking radar. So that didn't matter that much to them what he was doing and what he wasn't doing. So why not just go down the normal channels of pulling him in for questioning and say, look, you're from the area. We know you come into the area. Your car has been seen in the area. We just want to make sure that you're crossed off the list. And I'll tell you why I don't think that happened at all, or potentially happened. Who knows? The fact that I still, to this day, believe that Bryan Kohberger went into law enforcement to have a discussion about this scenario, and he told them exactly what he was doing. And like I've said previously, I believe that he, by talking to law enforcement without legal representation, he opened him up to what we're seeing now. That's what I believe. And this knife sheath, I still feel strongly that it could have been planted. I still feel, and I know that people are not going to like that, and that's an easy way to cop out. We can go down a more convoluted way of explaining it, and I know people are going to argue because on one hand they're going to accept the convoluted way of obtaining his DNA, but they won't accept the convoluted way of explaining the knife sheath away. In terms of touch DNA is worthless. It's absolutely worthless. He could have touched something that someone else touched, and they touched the knife sheath, and it's as simple as that. That would not hold up in court. Definitely not in a death penalty case. 100%. That's scrap. But it's everything else around it. Even the going further into this, like now, the hearings that you've got coming up, look, I will show you. This is what you've got coming up. So it's still being argued to this day, which is the court hearing, look. This is bringing back Leah Larkin and Bicca Barlow. So they're still going on about the DNA because Ann Taylor still doesn't have the information. How is that a thing? Fuck what the public knows and what they want to know, but the defence team, they should have all of this. They should have it. Yes, they are gagged, so they can't go to the public. But this is what Ann Taylor is now doing. She wants the public to be aware of what is being withheld. It's not about showing the public the information, because that's what I'm getting from people. They think that she just wants to show people the information and get it out to the public, but it's not about that at all. I'll just bring these notes back down here, because for some reason they don't want to come down. That's the issue. The issue is what Ann Taylor, she's had enough of watching the public manipulate what information is out there. So she is now making it very, very clear to the public, look, I don't even have the evidence in the PCA. You're all pulling the PCA apart and going through it and using it and manipulating what's carried in there to hurt my client. But I don't even have the proof to make sure that that's right. See what I mean? And what did I put in here? Just some key pointers to take, some take homes to just think about. The destruction of the crime scenes right from the get-go. Ann Taylor, when she first came into this, she had to stop them from touching that crime scene, pulling it apart, pulling stuff out. She had to do that immediately. Before she was even there, they were in that crime scene, dismantling it, looking to take all the stuff away, and that shouldn't have happened. That crime scene was fucked from the off. And then, where does it end up? It ends up getting sold or given, donated, whatever, to the University of Idaho, who we have recently seen that they have massive issues with groups of their students going around and beating the shit out of other students and getting away with it. They then knock the house down, remove it from the area, and then bury the house in an unknown location. Make that make sense. The manipulation of the media. This has happened right from the get-go. The manipulation of the media, by the media, has happened from the get-go. I'll give you an example here, right? And this is where it started. The Kohbergers gave a statement about Bryan Kohberger being arrested, okay? The family statement said, first and foremost, we care deeply for the 4 families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them. It continued, we will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we love and support our son and brother. We have fully cooperated with law enforcement agencies in an attempt to seek the truth and promote his presumption of innocence rather than judge unknown facts and make erroneous assumptions, which is just wrong assumptions. So absolutely the best way that they could have handled that. Absolutely best way they could have handled that. But straight out the fucking gate, you've got this, right? So this is Jennifer Coffin Dodger, and she is talking about I think it is a smart and responsible response to make as a parent. You want to support your child. It is normal and natural to believe your child is innocent, especially against atrocities like these. It was nice to acknowledge the victims whose lives were brutally taken from them. Coffin Dodger added, the suspect's family's opinions rarely have no relevance here, and no doubt to me, law enforcement will look into the parents to see if they aided and abetted him. Bryan Kohberger. So straight out the gate, you've got people like Jennifer Coffin Dodger crucifying right from the start. This is right out the gate, right? This report was literally immediately. This was January the 1st, 2023. Immediately straight out the gate, and they are latching onto it and basically saying Bryan Kohberger's family, their opinions don't matter. And they should be interviewed and looked into to make sure they weren't helping him. But we're not helping him fucking what, man? Do you know what I mean? I get it, but this is... I know we're now further down the road, and we've seen how this has gone. The media have called the guy a cannibal. They've said he's an incel. They've accused him of going into someone's house and setting up cameras to stalk them. The list goes on. So the manipulation of the media and how that has formed a hatred towards Bryan Kohberger is going to play a very strong role in this case. Exculpatory evidence from Bethany Funk. We know that there's potential exculpatory evidence from Bethany Funk, and I mentioned that at the beginning of the video. Emotionally charged Gonsalves family. A massive, massive piece of this entire debacle has been caused by a family with a large support network, and they are pushing false information that stemmed from this PCA that is yet to be proven even to the defence, and misquoting from it. Again, quoting to 60,000 plus people that Bryan Kohberger switched his phone off during the time of the crime. The reality is, we don't even know what the time of the crime was, because they seemingly basing the time of the crime on an eyewitness statement who may have differed from the other person in the house, and a car that they think is involved because they think Bryan Kohberger is the person who did it. But if he's proven to be somewhere else, then what are they then going to say? Was that car anything to do with the crime? Or is it possible that someone went into that house on foot and that car was in fact nothing to do with it? Nothing to do with it whatsoever. They just ain't found them because the person just, I don't know. Who knows? The defence still does not have the evidence to support the PCA. For the PCA to even be viable, there would have to have been supportive evidence. So why does Ann Taylor not have it? What was this? Why the preliminary hearing was cancelled? Did the prosecution know right from the start they did not have enough evidence to hold Bryan, so they played the system in the hope they could fill in the blanks later, and now they're struggling to do it? That's, to me, what is going on here. Let me know down below what you think, and I will catch you all in the next one.